Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Passion from Pain, the podcast where we don't hide behind perfection. We wrestle with purpose. And around here, pain isn't the end of your story. It's the plot twist that leads to your transformation. And today's guest, he's built an entire mission around that exact truth. Ernest James is a public speaker, motivator, and the voice behind the hit YouTube show and podcast, Deal to Heal with E. James. Through his work, he's helping people to stop running from what broke them and start rebuilding with what's left. He's the founder of dealhealfulfill.org, a movement built to help people deal with their pain, heal from their past, and fulfill their God-given purpose. He's also the creative mind behind Ernest James Speaks Life, because when this man speaks, it ain't just words, it is medicine. And Ernest has a way of calling you out while lifting you up at the same time, mixing wisdom, humor, and that straight up truth that hits you right between the ribs, right where you need it. So if you've been stuck in your story and are tired of pretending that you're fine or just need to finally heal for real, stay here. This conversation is going to challenge you, convict you, and ultimately set you free. I'm your host, Amy Pease, and this is Passion from Pain with the one and only Ernest James. Thank you so much for coming on today, Mr. James. I am excited for this conversation.
No problem. No problem. Thank you for having me. I always like to say it's cool being on this side of the mic when I ain't got to do nothing but talk, because I'm pretty good at that.
I love it. So, and when you're talking about yourself, that's the easiest topic there is, I think. I love it. So tell me about yourself and your story and what led to, coming up with Deal to Heal and your whole platform.
Yeah. So, again, thank you for being here, for the opportunity to be on your podcast. So basically, I'm Ernest James. I'm a speaker. I'm an author, podcaster, of the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, which is my first podcast. And I also have another podcast called Girl Dad Discussions, where I talk to other girl dads about the daddy-daughter relationship in order to combat the narrative of the absent father and the fatherless daughter. So my story started, if I go all the way back, just a young boy, grew up in the church, two-parent household, which definitely made a difference in my upbringing, because I recognized early that everybody didn't have that same story, right? Yeah. To have my mom and dad under the same roof, for my entire life. And so at a young age, I noticed that and was like, okay, when I get older, I want to be a mentor, because I want to be that person. I want to be that father figure for those who didn't have their fathers in their lives. And that is one of the things that I do now. I'm a part of an organization called Champs Male Mentoring here in Chicago. So that was part of my story. And, just a lot of different things happening, through my life to get me on this particular projection that I'm on now. And I think it all started sort of when my mom passed away. That kind of was the catalyst. Actually, before my mom passed away, my mother-in-law at that time passed away first. And I was very close to her. We had a great relationship. She was a beautiful woman, and she got sick and ended up passing away from cancer. And fast forward 3 years, I say around 3 years after that, my own mom got sick and ended up passing away from cancer as well. And so during that time in my life, I kind of was going through like the roughest time of my life I've ever had, right? Dealing with those two losses, for number one. And then, I'm a bricklayer by trade. And this was like, right, we were the country was kind of going through a recession. So work had slowed down. So that affected me financially. And then, financial stress with the loss of my mother-in-law affected my marriage. And so then now I'm looking at divorce. And so just a whole lot of stuff happening at that same time. And I always say
Yeah.
time period, I was living a D life, right? Because I'm dealing with
Mhm.
divorce, I'm dealing with debt, I'm dealing with my own depression. Then I'm dealing
Mhm.
with death of two women that I love dearly, And so it got to the point that I was so low that I started having suicidal ideations. And I'm
Oh,
really contemplating, like, you know what? Things would just be better if I wasn't here. Then I wouldn't be a burden on my family. Then it's, things of that nature. And one particular day, I'm at home with my daughter and we're playing out in the front yard. I'm sitting on the little porch area and she's playing in the front yard. I got the little kiddie pool out and I got the, sprinklers on and she's running through the sprinklers and jumping in the pool. And I'm, just sitting there watching her play. And she's running and playing in the water. And then she turns and runs to me on the porch. And so when she gets to me on the porch, she starts crying. And I said, what's wrong? Because she was just playing. Nothing
yeah.
happened. And she
Yeah.
said, I miss my grandmothers.
Oh.
And it was at that moment that I really had to think about it because my daughter at that age, she probably was like 7 or 8. But
Mhm.
she already was a daddy's girl. Like everywhere I went, she was with me. And I had to really think about it. Like at her young age, she recognizes that both of her grandmothers is not here.
Mhm.
What would happen to her if I'm not here as well? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so
Yeah.
that realization kind of woke me up, even in the midst of what I was going through. And I said, well, if for no other reason, if I can't find the strength to stay for my own self, I have to stay here for her, right? I have to
Yeah.
be here for her to make sure that she's okay. And that was kind of the beginning of my turnaround to kind of get out of that depression with some help from some loved ones and family members. I was able to come back from that place. But that probably was one of the darkest spaces I've ever been, in my life. And,
Yeah.
I talked about it. I actually did my first TEDx talk last year and I talked about it. That was like the
Mhm.
topic of it. Um, but yeah, that's probably one of the main things that has happened, in my life that I had to come back from,
Yeah.
just to find that passion for life again, from the pain of that. And then now being on the other side of it, I'm very vocal about it, especially, with this space that we are in now when we talk about mental health and things. And just as a man, I'm very vocal about it. I'm very open about, the fact that I've, dealt with this and especially as a man in the construction as well, because what I found out later on that the construction industry is like within the top 10 when it's top within the top 10 industries of high suicide rates. You
Oh, wow.
know,
I didn't know that.
yeah, and I didn't either. And I've
Yeah.
been a bricklayer for 20 some years. But I just, doing my research and looking into it because I started being passionate about talking about it, I
Sure.
came across that and I'm like, I mean, I understand it because construction is a male dominated industry,
Mhm.
we always trying to save face for one another and show up as strong and nobody wants to look weak. And so we're not having the conversations about the things that we're dealing with as men, in that industry. And then unfortunately, when we don't have nobody to talk to about it and we don't work through the things that we need to work through, then we find ourselves in these dark places where, you know, unfortunately, sometimes, some of us don't come back from.
That's a powerful story that so many men need to hear, because a lot of men, they don't want to share these feelings, they don't want to share these emotions, and it does lead to extremely high suicide rates. And this is one of the reasons that this podcast exists, is to get these messages out there for everybody, but men as well. I want this
Mm.
to land on the men. They need this message because they do matter, and their mental health does matter. And I don't care what they were raised being told, what strength is,
Yeah.
and what weakness is. Real strength comes in being able to reach out and ask for that help when you are suffering, because there is somebody that needs you. Like your little girl looked up at you, and was missing her grandparents, and that was the realization for you to find the strength to just keep going, was for that little girl. And that's all that it took. And it sounds small, but it was massive. And now you're here sharing, your story, but you're sharing so much hope for so many other people, and especially men. And I am just so grateful that you're doing that. And you're holding space for that. And so I just wanted to put that out there and just really appreciate what you're doing, and recognize how much strength it takes for you to come out and talk about just all of this. I mean, really.
And so one of the things that I realized, because I talk about it so much more now, is that there are so many people that are just waiting for the invitation to have a conversation, right?
Yeah.
And so it's probably a couple months ago now. I'm, of course, like I said, I'm a bricklayer, and so I'm on a job site, and I'm working with a laborer, and usually it's a group of us working together. But this particular day, it's just me and one other laborer, so it's just the two of us, doing this particular job by ourselves. And the guy I was working with, I had worked with him as a group, but I never worked with him just one-on-one. And so this is our first time, like, actually really talking, And so we're having a conversation. And he says, "Hey, what did you do last weekend?" And it just so happened that previous weekend I had a speaking engagement. And so I told him, "Hey, I had a speaking engagement and everything." And so he said, "Oh, you're a speaker?" I said, "Yeah, and I got a podcast," and kind of going through the different things. And he asked about the podcast. And I, shared with him that, I talk about the things that I went through, divorce and depression and suicidal ideations. And for things that I haven't been through, I bring on other people to talk about those topics. And so when I said suicidal ideation, he was like, "Huh?" And, we started talking about it. And so his story was, not only did he have suicidal ideations, but his father had suicidal ideations, to the point that his father actually went through with it. And he was the one that found his father's body. And so we end up having maybe like a 30-minute conversation, just the two of us. And then we end up going to break. It was like break time, like, all right, I'm going to go to lunch and come back. And so when we came back, he's like, "Ernest, you're a real cool guy to talk to, because the conversation we just had, I've never had with anybody, And so that's another thing why that fuels me so much to be open as I am, because I know that there's guys, especially men, that are holding things in that they really need to be able to talk to somebody about, And so because, we want to be macho and we want to be strong and we want to save face, we're not going to be the first one to say it. So when I come and say, "Hey, look, this is what I dealt with, and I've been through divorce, and I've been through depression, and I've been through suicidal ideation," then that opens up the door for them to just say, "You know what? I've been dealing with the same things too."
Yeah.
And once that door is open, then it's easier for us to have the conversation, and it's easier for them to release some of the things that, like he says, never told anybody.
Well, and I'm sure it's just a huge help alone to be able to get the weight off and get the words out, and instead of just keeping it inside and internalizing it and pushing it down. I'm sure that alone was huge for him, massive.
Yeah, and I'm sure. Yeah.
And so how does it make you feel knowing that you can be that kind of help to others through your story?
Man, I love it, and it means so much to me. I had a conversation with someone else the other day. They was calling me, asking me, for some help with something that they're working on, and I'm always helping somebody. That's just my heart. And so, while I'm having this, conversation with her, she was like, "I really appreciate you. You're always helping people and things of that nature. Like, we can count on you." And I said, "You know what? It comes from, my mom. My mom was a preacher, and when I was younger, one of her prayers, even before she was in a position to be a preacher, just being a minister, one of her prayers was, "God, give me a love for your people." Right. And so it showed in her actions and the way that she communicated with people that people really loved her. And so just growing up watching her and hearing that prayer and even taking that prayer on myself, like, "God, I want to have love for your people. I want to be able to help people." And to be now, even with the work that I do, I don't look for it, but when someone does tell me, like, you know what, that really helped me, and thank you, and then it's just like, oh, okay, I must be doing something right. You know what I mean? So it really means a lot to me, because that has
Yeah.
always been, part of my desire, just to be able to help people, and to
Mhm.
be able to show up in spaces, and give people the space that they need. I remember having another meeting with another young lady, and she was kind of a personal development type deal.
Mhm.
And so she was asking me questions like, how do you see yourself, and how do you want to be seen, and things like that. And what I said to her, and it still resonates with me, I said, I want to be a sanctuary. I want to be a safe space for
Yeah.
people, is wherever I go. I just want to be able to hold a space, for whoever I come in contact with, whether I say it or not, that they feel loved, that they feel cared for, and that they
Mhm.
feel safe to be able to be vulnerable and open around me. And that's my heart's desire.
That's a beautiful desire. I love it. And so you came up with deal, heal, fulfill, and it's simple, but it hits
Mhm.
really hard. Where did that phrase come from, and what does that really mean to you?
So I was, again, just doing the work that I do and helping people. One of the things I always say is start with yourself, right? All right. So what are the problems that we have? Let's get active with, the problems and things of that nature. And in the midst of, just working, I kept saying this mantra over and over again. Even before, well, I didn't recognize it. So one day I was just like, oh, that sounds cool, right? So I was
Mhm.
saying, deal, heal, fulfill. Deal with your problems, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. And I kind of was just saying it, and then one day it kind of clicked, and I was like, oh, I like that. And so I kind of just built like a whole thing around it, So I got like Deal to Heal Tees, which is my inspirational t-shirt line, and Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, and Deal to Heal Podcasting Network, where we have all our podcasts. And so it just kind of took on a life of its own. But, and it's, like I said, it's simple, but it kind of gets to the heart. Like, okay, let's just, even like the shirt I have on, it's the red, yellow, and green. So the red is stop to deal with the problem. The
Mhm.
yellow is heal from the pain, and the green is fulfill your purpose. So it's just like, all right, stop, slow down, go. You know what I mean? And so just that it sounds simple, it's easy to remember, but I think even the words itself, even when I don't, like, sometimes I have on a shirt that just has the logo on it, which just says
Mhm.
deal, heal, fulfill. And people just, even with just that, and people be like, I like that. And just they just kind of resonate with just those three words alone. So it was just something that just kind of came to me in the midst of me, doing the things that I do.
I love it, and it's catchy. And if you're in the moment of some sort of crisis, I mean, it's three simple words to kind of help pull you back into a reality of sorts as well.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it. And so many people want to do the fulfillment without doing the healing, the work,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
definitely without dealing with the truth first.
Mhm.
How do you help people through that process? It's the toughest part.
Yeah, yeah. And because, so I, like I said, I go in order, right? It's like you can't skip, it's 1, 2, 3, not 3, 2, 1. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? So you gotta go in order. And so I always say start with yourself. Like, what really is the problem? What are you dealing with?
Mhm.
And being able to be honest about it, being able to be vulnerable, again, creating those safe spaces where people can be vulnerable enough to admit some of the things that they're dealing with and what it is that they're, need to work through. Like, all right, now that we admit it, number one, we got to accept the fact that we're dealing with it. And then once we accept the fact that we're dealing with it, what do we want to do about it? Let's
Mhm.
assess it now. Let's kind of work our ways through it. And then after we assess it, then now let's ascend from it. Like, let's rise above whatever that thing is. And that's just in the dealing part, just like we just right there. Like, let's work through that, and once we've dealt with it and begin to, acknowledge it and kind of work through that process, now we can start receiving the healing that comes along with it. that comes after it. Like, all right, now I'm able to have conversations that I wouldn't have before. Now I'm able to forgive, some of the people that I wouldn't have forgiven before. Now I'm able to forgive myself. That's a big thing. One of the things, I actually wrote an ebook on it called "Forgiving Me: The 4-Step Guide to Self-Forgiveness," because a lot of times, especially when we've had, we made decisions in our past and we've done some things in our past, and hindsight is always 2020. But in the midst of it, while we were doing it, we kind of thought we was doing the best thing. At least I would have to think we were. But once we look back on some of those things, it's like, dang, I shouldn't have did that. I knew better than that. And out of those things. And so you start having these, guilt feelings, and you start holding these grudges against yourself because now you're angry at yourself for doing something, that, you probably should have known better or whatever it was. But when we start working through self-forgiveness and begin to forgive ourselves for some of the things that we've been through, one of the things that I do, I'm a part of an organization called the Forgiveness Mission, and we have free virtual workshops bi-monthly, right? And we talk about everything surrounding forgiveness of self, forgiveness of others, forgiveness of the world, just everything. And so in one of those workshops we're having, one of the young ladies asked about, well, how do you begin to forgive yourself? And in the midst of that, when she asked that, and it just was a divine download, right in the midst of it, it was like, well, let's look at the word self as an acronym. And when we start talking about forgiving ourselves, and we look at the word self as an acronym, the S stands for season of life. What season of life were you in when you made this choice and you made this decision, right? And so I have to talk about now. I'm 49 now, right? But maybe when I was 21, 19, I'm sure I made some decisions that I probably be like, yeah, that was stupid.
I think we all have.
Right. But if I'm able to look at that from the lens of what season of life was I in, right? I was just young and dumb, right? And if I can acknowledge that at that season, in that season of life, that's where I was, then I can begin to forgive myself because it just was a season, And so the E stands for emotional state. What emotional state were you in when you made this decision? And I often talk about, when my mom passed, emotionally, I was all over the place, so I'm sure that probably was some decisions that I made, during that time period that, I could have made better or could have been something different. But if I acknowledge that emotionally, I wasn't myself, emotionally, I probably wasn't in a space where I should have been making any decisions because of where I was, So if I acknowledge that the emotional state that I was in was just not a good space, again, I can start to give myself a little grace for that. And then the L in the acronym SELF stands for limited information. What information did you have, or what information didn't you have when you made that decision? Because a lot of times we make decisions based on the information that we have, and then when we get all the information, it's like, had I known that, I would have, I would have did this differently, And so you look at the information that we have, what limited information that we have. And so when we get to the F and we look at the F, and so we look at the S for season of life, the E for emotional state, the L for limited information. So when we get to the F and we are able to look at our life and our situation through those first three viewpoints, then we can begin to get to the F and give ourselves forgiveness by grace, by recognizing that at the time, looking through these three viewpoints, I was just doing the best that I could at that moment. Right. And so that's how we begin to forgive ourselves for some of the decisions that we made, in the past. And, again, going through that as we deal with, the things that we've dealt with. And then now we're coming to this space of healing, of forgiveness, and forgiveness of ourselves, forgiveness of others, to make peace with ourselves and where we are. Then we can start fulfilling the purpose that we have for our life. Because a lot of times our purpose comes from our pain. It's the pain that we've had in our past that gives us the passion to move forward, that gives us the passion to do the work that we do. And I often say, like, I don't want to say nobody, but I will say nobody never like gets a passion from something that's really joyous. Like, oh, I'm having so much fun. Like, no, generally it's something bad that happens that gives you that passion that says, I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through. So now I'm going to start working it in order to make that happen. So yeah, so that's kind of the process, that deal, heal, fulfill, to just kind of get through the things that we're dealing with to get to that fulfillment stage.
Yeah, and I love it. I love your self acronym too for the forgiveness piece, because it's so true. I mean, when you are making decisions, yeah, you're doing the best you can with the information, tools, and resources you have available at the moment, right?
Mhm.
And especially if you're in that emotional mindset, if you're making decisions from that side of your brain instead of the logical side of your brain, well, yeah, you're going to make stupid choices. When you're emotional, that's when the stupid choices are made, and unfortunately, your logical brain is not kicking in. Your amygdala is taking over, and the rest of your brain is just like, oh, that guy, he's the one that's taken over now. I'm out, I'm gonna go take a nap.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the way that goes, unfortunately. But yeah, and so yeah, you got to give yourself the grace, you got to give yourself the understanding. And
Mhm.
God, especially if it was a decision that you made when you were young, when you thought you knew everything, but you knew
Yeah.
nothing. You knew nothing
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
all.
And then
And
it
so,
also helps when you become a parent, right? And you look back
oh
on
yeah,
some of the things that you did, and it allows you to give even your children grace, because it's like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to tell you what I did at that age, but it's like, yeah, okay, you know what I mean? We can kind of give them a little grace, just thinking back on some of the decisions that we made. It's like, all right, let me not be as hard on them, because, it wasn't what I did, you know what I mean?
right. Exactly. And there's so many stories that I would love to share with my kids, but on the other end, I don't want to give them any ideas.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yep.
I don't want to give them any ideas. They're gonna have enough trouble, navigating young adulthood and whatnot. I don't need to
Right.
put anything in their heads, so I'll keep those for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I love it. And so you do a lot with dads and daughters, which is kind of a
Yeah.
complicated relationship for a lot of men because they don't understand females in general, let alone how to
Mm.
raise a young woman. And so this is a really cool topic that you really address on a different podcast. You want to talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. So, that the crazy thing about that, everything that I'm doing now kind of spawned from that, right?
Uh-huh.
And so I'll go back. So again, I talked about, going through a divorce.
Sure.
And when I went through my divorce, coming out of my divorce, one of the things that I recognized was every woman I've ever dated was a fatherless daughter.
Oh.
And I never recognized it before then, but because of the complications that I had in my marriage, it started to show, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
then when I recognized that after the fact, I'm like, man, I never realized that, but every woman I've ever dated was a fatherless daughter, and which was very different from my upbringing. Again, I grew up in a household with my mom and my dad, my entire life. And so, being the person that I am, I said, well, since I keep connecting with this demographic of women, what can I do to help them? And so I started a page on Instagram called Friends to Fatherless Daughters, and I would just go on and kind of give my advice from a father's point of view as being a girl dad. My daughter's my only biological child, who she's 22 now, so she's a big girl now. But
Yeah.
so just from the viewpoint of a father, as someone who's dated fatherless daughters, also as a brother to five sisters, right?
Oh,
And even watching my dad raise my five sisters without each personality, and so just kind of from my experience, I started this page on Instagram, and I was just giving my viewpoint on things that I thought would help fatherless daughters. And a young lady reached out to me and said, would you like to be on my podcast? And I said, okay. I'd never done a podcast. I had heard of podcasts, but I'd never been
sure.
on one. So I said, all right, cool, I'll do it. And I did her podcast. And after I did her podcast, I had like seven other podcasts call me. right? And
Wow.
so I'm like, all right, cool. So I'm doing all these, fatherless daughter podcasts,
Yeah.
and one podcast in particular, they were virtual like this, and
Mhm.
so I was able to go to Texas, which is where one of the guys that was over one of the podcasts lived. And so when I
Yeah.
was in Texas, I hit him up and I was like, "Hey, I'm in town. Let's do lunch or whatever." And so we ended up doing lunch, and over our conversation, he was like, "I think you should have your own podcast." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I never thought about it, but okay." So I put some thought into it and what I wanted it to be and things of that nature. And 200 and some episodes later,
Wow.
on a Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, here we are. And so that all started from that realization of the fatherless daughters, right?
Wow.
But that kind of was the beginning of it, right? To the things that I was doing. But I just realized that I connected with that demographic, right?
Yeah.
And I, just having a heart that I have, like, how can I help? And so I really started diving into, reading books on, fatherless daughters and the effects of fatherlessness, and then one of the things that I would always ask on the Deal to Heal podcast, whenever I would have a guest on who was a girl dad, I will always
Yeah.
ask them two questions. Like, what does it mean to be a girl dad to you? And what is something
Mhm.
that your daughter has taught you? And I always had great, responses for them from those questions. So I just said, you know what? I think I need to make this a whole podcast by itself. And so I
Mhm.
started the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, just to, again, to have talk to dads about their relationship, that daddy daughter relationship, and I even started having daughters on as well, and adult daughters, to talk about their relationship with their fathers, just really to build up, the notion that there are great fathers out here that's in the
Yeah.
lives of their daughters, and active in the lives of their daughters. And
Mhm.
just just to say, we don't always get it right, right? And so I had a young lady on, who had an amazing story. They actually made a movie about her story because
Mhm.
her mom and dad separated, and her dad kidnapped her and
Oh.
took her to another country, and so they had to get like the not the FBI, but like the, I don't know, SWAT team or whatever you want to call it, to like
Mhm.
literally go into this other country and rescue her and bring her back,
Oh my
and
goodness.
so it's like, I told her, I said, well, I understand the love for your daughter, you know what I mean, but I don't recommend anybody kidnap your daughter.
Right. Right.
But yeah, but just those stories of, of dads that want to be in their daughters' lives, that's active in their daughters' lives, and that are really, showing their daughters that they care. And
Yeah.
just a message that I want to get out there, because we often hear about the fatherless daughters, and we often hear about the deadbeat dads and all of that. I'm like, no, there's another side to it, and I want those voices to be heard. So that's why I started the Girl Dad Discussions podcast.
No, I love it. And then, I'm sure that it absolutely provides value to maybe those girl dads that are struggling,
Yeah,
with being consistent in their daughters' lives because maybe their relationship with the mother is complicated. And
yeah,
that's usually what leads to, these men who just can't or won't show up for their daughters. But
yeah,
it is really one of the most important relationships that a woman needs is the
yeah,
father. It's gonna set the tone for any relationship she's gonna have with any man for the rest of her life. And
yeah,
unless she goes through a few bad relationships and then goes through the healing process and figures it all out. But man, that's a hard way to go about learning it.
yeah, yeah. And this is so one of the things that I recognize, that just going for the fathers, let's just say for the fathers going through, learning to be a father, a lot of for those who didn't even have the example, right? So my
Mhm.
first guest that I had on the first episode, I chose him for a reason, right? He's a friend of mine, but at the time that we recorded the very first episode of the Girl Dad Discussions, he had just had his first child, which was a daughter, and she was
Oh,
like
wow.
3 months when we recorded that episode. And so I
Uh-huh.
started with him on purpose, because my goal from there on out was, I want to make sure that in every episode I leave something to help him, as a new father on this new journey, as a new father, as a new girl dad,
Mhm.
just some information and tips that's going to help him, along the way.
Yeah.
Also, one of the things that I did, I wrote a ebook called The Core Four, which is the four core values that every daughter needs from her father. And
Mm.
on the Girl Dad podcast, we actually talk about the book, because I send the guests a copy of it so they'll be able to read it ahead of time. But just those core values, what I did, I started thinking about, what were the core values that I wanted to instill in my daughter,
Mm.
and also what was the core values that I seen my dad instill in my sisters, just really kind of diving deep into it. And so what I came up with was, um, love and affection, affirmation, guidance, and protection.
Mhm.
At its core, to
Yeah.
start, I think every father needs to at least start there, right?
Yeah.
So with guidance, and I always give my definition of what my example with my daughter, is not just, right from wrong. You're guiding like real life lessons, like this is what you need to look out for, be careful for
Mhm.
this, and sometimes it's not, again, not right from wrong. It might be for better and best, right? And so
Yeah.
I talk about when my daughter wanted to buy a car, and she's like, "Dad, I'm saving up my money. I want to buy this car." And I said, "Well, that's good, but a better idea is let's work on your credit so you can walk in there with no down payment, and
Mm.
just sign your name in. That'll be a better decision, But
Mhm.
again, that guidance to be able to guide her through that." Um, then affirmations, and I say affirmations is telling your daughter something that she should know, but maybe she don't, right? Telling her how beautiful she is, how smart she is, how
Mhm.
capable she is, how worthy she is, just affirming her as being your daughter, then affirming her as a young woman so that she doesn't have to hear it outside of the home.
Yeah.
We always say that the your dad is your first example of love from a man, and
Mhm.
you never should hear "I love you" outside of the home before you've heard it inside of the home. And unfortunately, sometimes that's what it is. And a lot of times our um, fatherless daughters get caught up in relationships and things that they shouldn't be in because they hear those words that they've been longing to hear from a man their whole life from their
Mhm.
father. And then this guy comes and he's giving them attention, and he's, tell them those words. And unfortunately, sometimes, it's to manipulate them.
Yep.
But when we as fathers show up and pour into our daughters and affirm them at a young age, and so they're growing up knowing, that they're beautiful. So the first time someone outside of the house tells them that, they're not so impressed by it. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I know, my dad told me. You know what
Exactly.
I mean? And so,
Show me something cool. Yeah, I know I'm
yeah,
pretty. Tell me something better. What else you got
yeah.
next?
So it was, affirmation. Oh, love and affection. So also
Yeah.
love and affection, which is another one, which is what does love feel like?
Yeah.
What does it look like? So affirmations is kind of like what love sounds like, but that
Mhm.
love and affection is what it looks like and what it feels like, to hug your daughter, to kiss her, let her know, just showing her that affection. Like this is what it feels like to be loved. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And so that again, when they get outside of the house, they know what that's supposed to look like. So if someone, says something to you wrong, or someone, handles you a certain way, you're like, no, that's not right, because that ain't how my dad handled me. You know what I mean? And so having that example to draw from, and then protection, of course, we all kind of have the physical protection. We think about,
Mhm.
your dad showing up and physically protecting you from harm. But I always
Sure.
say, even take it a little further, I always say if we exchange the word safety, I mean, change the word protection to safety, and we
Yeah.
show our daughters what it is to be safe, to have a safe space for them to be able to express themselves, for them to be able to show up how that they want to show up, And I
Yeah.
think just building that space for them also, opens up so much in their lives. And one of the things that I realized after I wrote the book, two things that I realized. One thing that I realized after I wrote it, and I would have conversations about it with people, is that not only do our daughters need that, but our sons need that as well.
Yeah.
Those same core values, our sons need them as well. And the other thing that I realized was that even though our daughters need this when they're younger, even as an adult woman, you never stop needing it. You're just
Mm-hmm.
looking for it from a different person, right?
Yeah.
And so when you get, let's say you get married, you're just looking for those same core values you want, but now you're looking to receive it from your husband. You
Mm-hmm.
want him to protect you. You want him to guide you. You want him to show you love and affection. You want him to affirm you. Like, so these core values you never stop meeting. You're just
Right.
looking for it from an additional person, because you still look for it from your dad too. Because it's like,
Sure.
once you was a daddy's girl, you're always a daddy's girl. So it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah, I still want my dad to tell me that I'm beautiful, but I'm also looking for my spouse to tell me I'm beautiful too. And so, yeah, that's been a passion of mine as well. Just like I said,
Mm-hmm.
coming to that realization that, I attract for whatever reason, or am attracted to fatherless daughters, and like, okay, what can I do with this information? How can I
Mm-hmm.
help this demographic? So
Yeah, wow. It's all such amazing work that you're doing, all these books that you've written, these podcasts, the stages that you've been on. How long have you been doing all this?
the last 4 years.
Wow.
That's why I said
Really?
all of this is kind of just like within the last 4 years. So let me say before the last 4 years. So after my divorce was like 4 years ago. And that's
Okay.
when I realized, the fatherless daughters piece.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always had a mind to serve. I always had a heart
Mm-hmm.
to serve. Again, growing up in the church, and I became a minister, and I was a executive pastor. So I was always in the space of service. But just wasn't until my divorce and realizing the fatherless daughter space that now everything that I'm doing now kind of spawned from that. The podcast and the ebooks and things of all of that just kind of
Mm-hmm.
came with that package.
Yeah, yeah. So you've always had this heart for helping others through their emotional heartaches and journeys.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
just growing up and being that person, the go-to person, when somebody wants
Mm-hmm.
to talk and then they call you, or somebody wants advice and then, they call you. So I've always been that person,
Yeah.
just naturally. So it's like, all right, how can I do it on a larger scale? How can I help more people, which is just my heart's desire? Like, how can I be a beacon of light in this world, with so
Mm-hmm.
much stuff going on? And so, yeah, so that's just always been my heart.
Well, and in Chicago, which is typically a little bit of a tougher area, I mean, were you ever picked on or anything like that for having such a big heart or anything when you were younger?
No, not for that.
Okay.
Huh?
No, I just said, oh, okay, good.
No. I've never been picked on for that.
Yeah.
Because people always liked me. I probably only had I probably count on my hands how many times I had a fight, right? And if you take
Oh,
away how many of those fights was with my brother, it's probably just one. You know what I mean?
okay.
So one of my brothers, I have three brothers, but one of my brothers is 1 year younger than me. And he
Okay.
always liked to pick on me, so we always was fighting. But outside of
That's
that, I probably never really had a fight.
wow.
Um, I can't even say I've ever really had a fight. And not being a people pleaser or anything like that. It just
Yeah.
I've just never gave off that energy. And once people actually talk to me, generally anybody that sits down and talk to me, they're like, "Oh, he's okay." You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
so I've never,
Yeah.
I never had that issue.
Yeah. Well, good, good. I just, man, I could tell you've always had this energy within you, and this desire to help other people, and I know that it can set some people off and intimidate some people, and that can be a trigger for some people, and
Mhm.
so just because they see the things in themselves that they don't want to look at, and
Yeah.
so have you ever experienced somebody who was maybe triggered by something that you were telling them or anything?
I can't think of nothing off the top of my head, but I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure, at least once or twice, you get
Yeah.
those people that just don't want to hear it. And
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
just having different discussions, even in and this climate that we're in now is like, politics and things
Mhm.
of that nature. It's like
Yeah.
those discussions are just heated discussions anyway,
Mhm.
and but I've learned to say, I always ask the question, why are we having this conversation? Like, are we having this conversation to get understanding, or do you just want to vent? Because if you want to
Yeah.
vent, I'll just let you say whatever whatever it is you want to say. You got it off your chest, you feel good. All right, let's go get some pizza. You know what I mean?
Right.
But
There
if
you
we
go.
really want to have this conversation to get understanding, then
Uh-huh.
okay, let's really dive deep into it, and you explain to me, how you feel about whatever the issue is, and I'll give you my viewpoint, and we kind of not
Yeah.
necessarily agree, but at least understand each other.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's I try to lead with that, but I always ask first, because some people just want to say, well, this is how I look at it. And it's like, okay, because
Sure.
you don't want to hear what I have to say. So, all right, you good? You got it out? All right, good. Let's go. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. Oh, I get it. And I'm out here in Oregon, and the political nonsense is thick out here.
Mm,
And yeah, it's the same thing. Just let them vent and let them do their thing, and then go on about your day, because they will suck you in if you let them.
yeah.
And so I don't want to live in that energy. But you go ahead, you go on with
Yeah.
that, and I'll go on about my day when you're done.
Yeah, and because there's so much stuff that, and I have someone recently I was talking about, asking me about how I feel about politics and stuff. I said I don't
Yeah.
really get into it, because it's so much stuff that's going on in your actual life, like that's
Right.
affecting you directly right now.
Hmm.
So I'm like, you know what? I have to worry about these things that's right here in front of me. I can't worry about what decisions that someone else is making, and even if those decisions does affect me, I can't worry about it till it reaches me. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Because on that level, all I'm doing is yelling anyway. It's like you're yelling to the wind. Like they're gonna do what they do. You know what I mean? So it's like, let me worry about the people around me. Let me worry about the things that I can touch, the differences that I can make right here in front of me. And if maybe I can't change the world, I always say that maybe you can't change the world, but you can change your world. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So if I can change my world, inside of all the craziness that may be going on outside of it, I'll
Yeah.
be good.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the way that it really should be. Is that I work on myself for you, and you work on yourself for me, and together we meet and we have community, and
Yeah.
we benefit from each other's strengths and support each other through our weaknesses. And that's really what community is about. But I think we've forgotten that. It just kind of as a whole in this country in particular, and we get so divided and so focused on what the other one is doing, but we just looking in the mirror at ourselves is, we can't do it. We can't do it. And I think that's the biggest problem that we have. We're at a time in this in history where we have the best understanding of psychology that we've ever had. The best understanding of philosophy, the best medications, ever. And at the same time, we have some of the worst suicide numbers and mental health numbers. And
Mhm.
it's kind of perplexing, but the answer is really simple in the fact that we're too worried about everyone else and not worried enough about ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, and I think community plays so much, um, makes such a difference in your life.
Yeah.
So I would say I love community, right? But I would
Yeah.
say I come from a family of community. So my grandmother was the baby of 12 siblings, and then
Oh my
she
God.
had nine. No, then she had 10. My mother was one of the 10, and then my mother had nine. You know what I mean? So I come
Wow.
from a family. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
you do.
community has always been big to me. And so even now, I even think about the spaces that I operate in. It's like I want to be a part of a community, and so everything that I enjoy, I try to build a community around it. So I started hiking last year, one of my first hike last year, and I was like, oh, I really like this, and so I started a hikers group when it started with just 7 of us. Now it's 130 of us, in
Wow.
that group. And this year I ran my first and second 5K, right? I ran my first 5K early in the year, and I ran my second 5K literally like 2 weeks ago. And so I
Congrats.
started a 5K group, and it's like 15 of us in that group, and I'm expecting that to grow pretty big, you know. And so I just look at everything that I enjoy. I look for the community in it, you know. My podcasting, I'm a part of a podcasting community. As a speaker, I'm a part of a speakers community. It's just like, where are my people, you know? And I think when we start doing that in our lives, like really looking like, I don't have to argue with you. I can just
Mhm.
find the people that live like I want to live and believe what I want to believe and just congregate with those people, right? So I just like, I always say,
Mhm.
find your tribe, you know, find
Yes.
your community in whatever space it is. If you're a politics person, all right, go find the people that want to talk politics. They're out there.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So whatever your niche is, you know, just find
Yeah.
your tribe in those spaces.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's the beauty of, well, what social media was originally intended for, and
Mhm.
online spaces, is that you can, extend your reach beyond your local area. I know here where I'm at, it's a small community. And so most of my friends are online, you know, because, that's where the speakers are, that's where the podcasters are, that's where a
Mhm.
lot of other people are that are looking to move or evolve past their pain and move up in their situations and whatnot. And so yeah, I had to find that online.
Mhm.
But that's cool. That's all right. That's where they are.
Yeah. And even me, like I'm like I said, I have 8 siblings, right? It's 9 of us, and
Yeah,
I'm pretty much by myself most of the time. I'm a loner.
yeah,
You know what I
yeah,
mean? So even within a big family, we do have our get-togethers and things like that nature. But on average, I'm usually by myself a lot of the times, and that's what
mhm,
one of the reasons why I started looking in communities, because I was like, all right, for everything I enjoy, I want to find those people that enjoy that. And
yeah,
so, I'll spend time with the speakers today. I'll spend time with the podcasters tomorrow. I'll be with the running group Friday, just kind of be, find my group and just commune with those people that love the things that I love.
mhm,
And when my family do our get-togethers, I'll, spend time with my family. But, just finding those spaces. And sometimes you need to get away from your family. So you need
yeah.
those outside groups. It's like, you know what? I'll talk to you guys later. I'm going over here.
I'm tired of you all. I'm going. Yep, yep. I need a break.
Yeah,
I'll be
yeah.
back.
So yeah, so then community plays. I think in this at least in my life, but I think in our world as a whole, communities will definitely play a big part in our own happiness and fulfillment. Is just really finding those people that enjoy what you enjoy and spending time with them.
Yeah, and that's really one of the biggest keys to overcoming yourself,
Mhm.
really, is finding the right people to connect with. It's not that you are necessarily the problem, it's that you are not surrounded by the right people, by the right community. And
Yeah.
God, just getting around the right people and ditching the negative people and the toxic people and the dramatic people, you'll be amazed at what that one act alone, what kind of transformation that'll have in your life right
Yeah.
there. I mean,
Yeah.
really.
And that definitely made a huge impact for me. So I'll go back, and I didn't even share this part. So when
Yeah.
my mother-in-law name was Chris. Her name was
Mhm.
Christine actually, but I called her Chris. And my
Yeah.
mother's name was Ann. So when they passed away, I started going to bereavement counseling,
Oh.
and I joined a bereavement support group. And I
Mhm.
love that group so much because we were able to come together and console each other. And you hear other people's stories, and you hear what other people are dealing with and how they've been able to overcome. And, I really love that space. And I loved it so much that I stayed and I became a volunteer. And I volunteered for over a year. And then when I left, when I stopped volunteering, I actually started a nonprofit, and I named it Ann Christine Charities after my mom and my mother-in-law. And what I did was offer bereavement support to our community, because in the African American community, it's not really talked about,
Mhm.
and it's not really, I don't want to say it's not embraced, because it does exist, but it's not
Mhm.
talked about as much, right? And so I always say, even when I was there for that whole year, I think there was only one African American family outside of myself that came through the bereavement program within the whole year, you know.
Wow.
And then as being a minister in the church, like I know that we're dying. I know that we have family members that's leaving here. I know that we're dealing with this, but for whatever reason, we're not, either we don't know or we're just not taking the opportunity to do these to go through the bereavement. So I started
Mhm.
doing it as a nonprofit, and I remember one particular thing. We had a family and friends day. It was like a family and friends weekend at the church, and so I held a bereavement class for those 3 days, and I had probably like 12 people that was in my class, and it was such a breakthrough with different ones. I remember one particular lady came to me when we were done, and she was like, "I'm so mad at you," and I said, "Why are you mad at me?" And she said, "Because I thought I dealt with, I thought I mourned her son." And she
Oh.
was like, "But I realize now that I didn't, because I had two other
Mhm.
sons." So she lost one son. And when she lost that son, she focused all her energy on her two other sons. And she never
Yeah.
took the time to grieve and things herself. And she was like, "I thought I was good, you know, until we started talking about it." And it was like, oh, she realized like she hadn't grieved yet.
Yeah.
But just those, you know, being able to have, you know, the right people around you, again, to have those conversations that we're not having. And that's why I love podcasting so much, you know,
Mhm.
because we're able to have the conversations and put the things
Yep.
out there that, you know, we may not have on a regular basis, you know, and then
Mhm.
some people may not have a person like me in their life where they can just say, "Hey, let me call Ernest and talk to him." Everybody
Yep.
doesn't have that, you know. And so if we can use our platforms to offer that space where just
Mhm.
like, hey, you know, if you need some help, you need to call someone, you need just to talk
Mhm.
about it, you know, you can, even as a listening ear, to listen to the conversations that we're having. Hopefully
Mhm.
you can get something and find some value just in the conversation, just being a fly on the wall, and still be able to get, you know, something to walk away with it from.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the biggest reasons that I put this podcast together, because when I was going through the whole debacle of putting myself back together, and I don't know, discovering who the hell I was for like the first time, I didn't have anything like this, and so it was really difficult, and I didn't have the people to reach out to, and the conversations and whatnot. And so it's one of the biggest reasons that I put this together, because had I had this, even just to listen like a fly on the wall, it would have been
Mhm.
immensely helpful back then. Just understanding that other people are going
Mhm.
through the exact same thing I was going through, the exact same feelings. I'm not alone. And other people have walked through the fire, through the trenches. They're on the other side, maybe not, fully healed, but they're on the other side of this
Mhm.
pain, and they're doing something with it. And that would have been extremely helpful. I think I would have been gone through it a lot quicker than about 20 years, I think.
Mhm.
Here you are 4 years later. It took me 20 to get to this point, but I don't know, I was a little shy
Yeah.
though too.
Yeah.
But
But
here we are,
even
here
that,
we are.
yeah, even that's been a journey, because I took a disc assessment. I took the disc assessment a couple years ago, like 4 years ago, and even that has opened up my eyes so much to who I am as a person and learning myself. Because again, going through my divorce, I was in my early 40s. And so even around that time anyway, you start having those, you know, midlife crises and reflecting on your life and all of that. So I found myself, you know, going through this transition where, you know, I was getting divorced. I wasn't, you know, married anymore. My kids was growing up. You know, my daughter was a young adult at that time. So now I'm a father, but I'm not, you know, like my daughter's a young adult now, you know, and so
Yeah.
that's different. And then we came through COVID with my church, where I was the executive pastor, and we ended up having to close the doors of the church, you know, after COVID.
Mhm.
So a lot of changes happened in my life around that time. And it's like, okay, all those things that I had originally identified myself with, a husband, a father, a preacher, you know, all of those things is gone now. So it's like, okay, so who
Yeah.
am I now? And
Yeah.
so I took a disc assessment at that time, and really just my
Mhm.
first time taking that and really diving into my personality and what makes me click, and started doing personal development and starting that journey. So that's all been a part of this journey too now, which has have
Yeah.
helped me, to do all the things that I do now, because it's kind of like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, these are the things that you enjoy. These are the, parts of
Yeah.
life that you like. And so not really
Mhm.
taking the time to recognize that, in my earlier years, like you said, you just kind of winging it and going, then you
Yeah.
realize, like, what, I don't really know who I am,
Yeah.
internally, outside of these, outside things that I use to define myself. Take those
Mhm.
things away and decide, okay, who am I on the inside? Who am I, particularly? So that's been a recent journey of mine as well.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a tough one to go down, especially when you thought you knew who you were, and then, like you said,
Yeah.
everything's stripped away from you, and you're looking in the mirror like, well, who the hell are you? I don't know you. And then you start to become familiar with yourself. You start to date yourself essentially, and become
Mhm.
familiar with who you are and what you really want, and how you really feel, and you start to strip away all the conditioning that you've been subject to your whole life, especially in my case. A lot of it was, stuff that other people had put on me that I thought was part of my personality, and I've since learned, well, no, that
Mhm.
was, no, that was them. um, and so had I not gone through that, I wouldn't be on here talking to you. I know that I would have been too shy. But having stripped all that away,
Mhm.
and realizing who I was, and finding my strength and my courage and my voice, I'm able to put myself out here, and have these conversations, and I'm really happy to have these conversations, because number one, I love to
Yeah.
help people come to these same realizations, because it really is a magical experience when it just finally hits you. It really is. I loved that feeling, and I talk about it often, when it just hits you, and it just, like, I don't know, it's almost like God just fills you up, and you're like, oh, this is kind of what everybody's been talking about this whole time. And that's just really what it felt
Yeah.
like when I finally understood who I was. And then I could figure out the purpose. And then from there, that's when the passion came.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's when the passion.
Yeah. And that's sort of just, yeah, that's the way it goes. You kind of
Yeah.
find your way, and then you look at those things. One of the things, when I was going through, even before, like at the start of this journey of the things that I'm doing now, looking for the purpose in it, and praying about it. God gave me this quote, and I actually made it into a T-shirt too. But it says, "Pain births purpose, purpose births progress, and progress is the evidence that God is at work."
Yeah.
And he gave me that, like, right at the beginning, when I would started doing, all the things that I'm doing now, even before the podcast, because I was searching for that purpose again, coming out of that space where everything was kind of, taken away, and kind of figure out who I am. And it was like, okay, pain bursts purpose. Okay, where's the pain at? And I coming through my divorce and realizing, hey, I've always talked to fatherless daughters. Oh, that's a pain point, And then I started talking about that. So, well, where's the progress? The progress, people called me out the blue and said, "You want to be on my podcast and talk about it?" Like, oh, okay, yeah, and that became the evidence that, okay, God is doing something here, and leading to me starting my own podcast. And like I said, now it's
Mhm.
200 and some episodes later. You know what I mean? So it just,
Awesome.
you have that pain, and you definitely don't volunteer for it. You know what I
Nope.
mean?
Nope.
You definitely
Nope. You
don't
don't.
volunteer for it. It's like you just kind of find yourself in this space, and it's like, oh man, this hurts,
Yep.
And then, but once you make it out of it, it's like, okay, what was the reasoning behind it? Like
Yeah.
I had to go through that for a reason, outside of
Yeah.
just my experience. Like, it's something
Hmm.
else behind it, and then you start looking into those, how your experience can be beneficial to other people, whether you're sharing it, on the mic, or you're sharing it in person, but you're having the conversations, and then you realize how much, yeah, I went through it, but to be able to see how much it helps somebody else was like, okay, I'll take it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What do you think is the biggest myth about purpose that you want to debunk for people?
You know what? So I don't know if it's necessarily a myth, but it's a
Yeah.
realization that I came to, and I've been thinking about this for a while, and I don't know if I'm gonna write a book on it or do a podcast about it, but
Yeah.
I often think about the collateral damage of purpose.
Yeah.
And so, what I mean by the collateral damage is, I'll take myself for example. When my mom passed away, me going through my transition and start going to bereavement and all of that, I found purpose in it. It's like, man, my mom passed. I was feeling this type of way. I went through this bereavement. I learned these tools. Now I want to share it with the world, right? So now I have this purpose. Like, all right, I'm gonna take this to the community and help them work through what they're going through and all of that. So I found the purpose in my pain. Well,
Yeah.
I got 8 siblings. They didn't get that same purpose. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They got the pain, but they didn't get the
Mm-hmm.
same purpose. So they got the
Right.
collateral damage of my purpose. You know what I'm saying? So they
Mm-hmm.
had to feel what I was feeling, but they didn't get the same thing that I got out of it. So um, that's just one of those things that I want to deep. I'm sure I'm going to dig deeper into it, but that was
Yeah.
just one of the things that I kind of think about sometimes. It's like, especially being in the speaker space, and you hear about you know being in other room with other speakers, and you hear about what they went through, and they got a
Yeah.
purpose, and now they're got this movement, and you just reflect on the opposite side of that coin. Like
Yeah.
the family that's going along for that ride, or the wife that didn't sign up for whatever it is, but now she's along for the ride, or the brothers and sisters who also, you lost a child, but then they lost a sibling, and now they're going along for the ride. It's just so much that we often don't think about, especially being the people that have the purpose, that found
Yeah.
the purpose in it. So now you got new life and new joy that came out of this pain, but your family just got the pain. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so it's like, okay, how do I even express to them, even compassion,
Yeah.
because they didn't get what I got. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so yeah, that's been something I've been thinking about.
That's going to be a good one. I could tell you that because I'm dealing with the same thing right now. My husband, he doesn't quite get it. He understands that I feel like I need to do this. He understands everything that I went through in my past. However, he doesn't quite understand the feeling of purpose that I have behind it. And so, yeah, it's something that he's struggling with. And so, yeah, no, that's going to be a good one. It's going to be a good topic. You definitely need to dive
Yeah.
into that. And so,
Yeah.
I could see you all day. I really could, but I know we're up on that time. There's one question that I really love to ask everybody, and I'm going to ask you, and that is, what does passion from pain mean to you?
um I would say it means new life, right? Because there is a life that we live before the experience that we have that changes everything.
Mhm.
I talked a lot about my mom, my mom's passing. And
Yeah.
my mom was like the, I don't know, the queen, you know what I mean? Like our life as my family kind of revolved around my mom. Like my mom was like the queen, should I say, and then my dad was like the enforcer. So everything that mom says goes. And if you didn't like it, then you got to go talk to dad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like that. And so our world kind of, rotated around my mom. And so to lose her, and to lose her quickly, right? And so
Yeah.
it was, I want to say toward the end of the year, maybe like December, when she kind of got sick, and we realized that it wasn't a regular sickness. Like, all right, something's really going on here, and we ended up going to the hospital and found out that it was cancer. And that was in December. She was gone by May. You know what I
Wow.
mean? And so it was
Yeah.
quick. you know. And so, you know, it's your life takes a turn, you know, and
Yeah.
but when you're able to find that purpose in that pain, everything changes, but now it's new, you know. And even going through bereavement, there was a term that I learned and I talk about often, which is your new normal. Like, this is your new normal. It'll never be normal as it was, but now this is the new normal, you know.
Yeah.
And then you have to learn to live in that new normal and find that new life. So yeah, I think that that's what it means to me. That pain, that purpose from pain is like you find that new normal, and now you have this thing that once caused you so much pain. Now you're able to flip it, and it brings you so much joy because you get to talk to others about it and help them walk through the pain that they may be in. So yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. I love it. And like I said, I just love you, and I could talk to you all day. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with before we leave for the day?
Yeah, I would say this year, I started this year off with a mission for myself, and that mission is to live the life I love.
Yeah.
And that's why I really started focusing on the things that I enjoy and making sure that I'm spending time in those things, you know, with my family, you know, whether it's hiking, whether it's podcasting, you know, whether it's running a 5K, whatever those things are, like, these are the things I enjoy. Let me make sure I'm putting time into those things. And really, when you start doing that, those little things add up. A little enjoyment here, a little enjoyment there, a little enjoyment there. And before you know it, like, you know what? I'm really loving my life right now. And so that's the message I would like to leave with everybody. Like, live the life that you love. You know, find those things that you love and make sure that you are putting some energy into it.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for being on, you know, and Ernest James doesn't just talk about healing, he lives it. He reminds us that pain isn't meant to be packaged, it is meant to be processed. That what broke you isn't the end, it is the invitation. Because until you deal with what hurt you, you can't heal. And until you heal, you'll never fulfill the purpose that pain was meant to awaken within you. Ernest is walking proof that redemption doesn't come wrapped in comfort. It comes wrapped in courage, the courage to face yourself, to forgive, to grow, and to speak life, even when life tried to silence you. So if today hit something deep, go follow Ernest's work at dealtohealfulfilled.org and ernestjamesspeakslife.com. He's out here building a movement that doesn't just sound good, it changes lives. And maybe that's your challenge today. Stop trying to get over it and start learning to get through it. Deal with it, heal from it, fulfill your purpose because of it. I'm your host, Amy Pease, and this has been Passion from Pain, the show where scars become stories and stories become strength and strength becomes service. Until next time, stay honest, stay hungry, and remember, your pain didn't come to destroy you, it came to develop you. I love you guys. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.